Good morning, party people, and welcome to the Old Harbor in Reykjavik. I've filmed here before in a couple of different locations. We got a little sunrise coming up behind me here, another typical gloomy day in the, I was going to say winter, but it's not winter yet, despite the fact that you see me wearing gloves. The fact that you see no snow here is how you know that it's not yet winter in Reykjavik. But winter is coming quickly. You know, the thing from Game of Thrones, winter is coming, and a lot of those scenes a lot of the show was shot here in Iceland, because if there are two things that Iceland is famous for, it's winter and sex. You should probably look that up. So I'm going to have a seat here on a park bench. I'll play the lonely guy sitting here on a park bench for today, and let's go fire up your questions and see what we've got here. So we'll fire up PollGab and see what y'all voted most highly here. So the top voted question is from Johnny. Johnny says, "Good morning, Brent. VARCHAR or NVARCHAR? Which one should I use in our Western world? One could say the disk space is cheap, so it doesn't matter, but with SQL Server's 8K pages, these pages will go full much more quickly when using NVARCHAR. I'm excited to hear your thoughts." Well, Johnny, it really all comes down to, do you need to store Unicode data or not? If you need to store Unicode data, like if your end users can put in things like Chinese characters, well, then you need to use NVARCHAR in your database. If you're sure that that will never be the case, that you're not going to put in other character sets inside your string columns, then don't use Unicode. It just really is that simple. It's kind of like when you're looking at numeric columns. I don't know if you can see the plane's kind of up high already. It's kind of like when you're looking at, like, say, numeric columns. Should you use big int for everything? No, of course not. If you're never going to store big, ginormous numbers in something, you don't need big int. You may be fine with just, for example, an integer column. So it's not really a question of storage, it's what are you going to put inside there. Next up, Volcano asks, it's probably an Iceland joke. Volcano asks, "Hi Brent, if I keep my compatibility level to 150, which is SQL Server 2019 if I remember right, and then I enable the legacy cardinality estimator, how does SQL Server internally use the latest 2019 features like adaptive joins or memory feedback?" So legacy cardinality estimator has nothing to do with latest features like adaptive joins. It's kind of like saying, if I don't zip up my pants, if I want to keep my pants unzipped like the legacy way of walking around before someone told you that your pants were unzipped, how does that affect my shirt? It doesn't. They're totally separate things, but you should probably zip up your pants. I don't very often see people micromanaging the combination of the latest and greatest compat level and yet the legacy CE. It's fairly unusual for me to see that because usually if the new CE breaks something, then the new features like adaptive memory grants, batch mode on row store indexes, adaptive joins also tend to break the application too as well. Or it's a situation where people haven't had the time to go test their application with those new features. It's not like I see people going, "Oh, we have plenty of time to test the new features. We just don't have time to test the old CE or the new CE." Usually you just test everything on the newest and greatest version of SQL Server and you just kind of call it a day there. Who are we kidding? People just don't usually test. PostgresCurious asks, "My company mainly uses Microsoft SQL Server and Azure SQL DB, but we're exploring Azure Database for Postgres as a lower cost alternative. What are the main gotchas and rough edges that developers and DBAs need to be aware of when switching to Postgres? Are there any advantages besides the lower cost?" Well, really, it's a totally different database system. It has its own totally separate gotchas. It has totally separate ways of looking at execution plans. It's totally separate kinds of DMVs. It is a different back-end, period, full stop. It's kind of like saying, I'm good at playing the piano and now I want to go play the guitar. The guitar is a separate instrument. If you need to play the guitar, then by all means go pick up the guitar, but they are not similar in a whole lot of ways other than the fact that you can write queries against them, and even the queries are different. So the thing I would say is don't assume that you're going to be good at one just because you're good at the other. Go to training classes, go read books. It's way beyond something that you're going to pick up in 30 seconds. However, the one thing I will say you is vacuum sucks on Postgres. That's the one thing that you didn't have to worry about when you were dealing with SQL Server, but vacuum on Postgres is a totally different animal. And some people who have never worked with databases at scale are going to say, like, what do you mean? Postgres vacuums itself automatically. Sure it does when the database is the size of a shoebox. You have a slightly different problem when you get into the terabyte plus territory. Next up, AlwaysLearningDBA says, thank you for taking the time to answer our questions for free. You're welcome. Helping us save face by telling us to use a friend of mine. Mimicking Clippy's voices and SQL Server voices is a great way to add fun to learning. I just can't get Clippy's voice out of my head now. Oh, you're welcome. Glad you enjoyed it. Next up, For My Friend says, I'm migrating to Azure SQL Databases from having my stuff on premises, and I'm experiencing a huge performance hit. Queries are taking 1 second on premises and then 8 seconds up in Azure. If I add a specific query hint, option hash group in Azure, it runs in 1.2 seconds. How bad is it to use this query hint? Any suggestions? So my first thought is that that there's a difference in the execution plan between, let me zoom out a little. The first thing that you want to ask when performance is different between two different servers, that's how cold it is. The wind is really cold this morning. I got to put the glove on. When performance is different across two servers, the first thing that you want to do is compare the execution plans across the two. Because it could be things like different database options, different server level options, different compatibility levels inside the database that are producing a different execution plan. And in that case, it may just be a matter of how do I encourage Azure SQL DB to use the same execution plan that my on-premises boxes do. It may be that because of those two differences, like in your case, you're saying that your on-premises box has one execution plan, you're trying to use a query hint to get the execution plan that you want up in Azure SQL DB. The reason why I worry about that is it really scalable for you to repeat that process on every single query that you have? Of course not. That doesn't make any sense. So that's why I would zoom out and go, why is Azure SQL DB choosing a different execution plan between these two? And then try to fix that root cause, like compatibility levels, different database settings, etc., so that you don't have to go through this painful process every single time you have a slow query. Query hints work one query at a time. That's why I rarely use them except in things like my mastering parameter sniffing class. They're kind of a last resort there because of how unscalable they are. Next up, Juggler314 asks, I've read your post on instance stacking not being advisable. Instance stacking means putting multiple instances of SQL Server on just one OS. He says, but if I'm limited to one OS install, licensing reasons, okay, I'm going to call you right then and there. If you're saying that the Windows licensing cost is a big deal, you have not gone and looked at the SQL Server licensing costs. SQL Server is dramatically more expensive than Windows. And I get really nervous when someone says things like, well, you know, I would buy a Porsche 911, but those tires, my goodness, the tires are expensive. I can't afford those kinds of tires. Dude, the tires are the least of your worries when you go buy a Porsche 911. He says, continuing on with it, he said, performance is wildly over-spec'd. Are there any downsides besides from the mentioned performance tuning issues? Are there any downsides beside performance? Where do they find you people? He says, I can give each instance enough RAM and CPU and I/O. Okay, time out. You are way off track. If you can pile on a whole bunch, pylon, makes me think of pylons. If you can pile on a whole bunch of databases onto just one OS and performance goes okay, put them all in the same SQL Server. Put them on one SQL Server instance and call it a day. That's less troubleshooting performance. It's less worries about having all kinds of agent jobs on the same machine. It's less worrying about monitoring, trying to make sure that all your scheduled jobs work effectively. Generally speaking, the less SQL Server instances you have, the better. The more instances you have, the more painful it is. Even take patching. I'm raising my voice, I gotta ease up. Even take patching. If you put 5 instances of SQL Server on the same OS, that's 5 times more patching that you have to do. Who has time for that? Instead, just run one SQL Server instance. And the instant that people go, well, I actually need separate ones for things like security, then you probably need separate operating systems as well. You probably need separate patching windows, because you can't get all 5 of those instances if they have truly different business needs. It's rare to be able to reboot Windows all at exactly the same time to fix patching problems, for example. So everything about this smells bad, and I don't believe it. I'm not saying you smell bad. You could be fine. You could smell like roses, but that idea, that's the one that I'm worried about. SunburnedDBA asks, a friend of mine, nicely done, is trying to capture queries that are bringing page life expectancy to 0 sometimes during the day. He has tried extended events. Any suggestions? Yes. So what your friend is probably missing, one of the common reasons that page life expectancy crashes to 0 is that you get a query that wants a really large memory grant. I don't think face tracking's working on this camera, so let me go pop this back to center and then it'll catch me again and remove me around. So you are missing out on the fact that queries are asking for a really large memory grant. They're asking for 25% of your server's RAM, and multiples of these queries are running at exactly the same time. They run within a matter of milliseconds, and then they give all that memory back to SQL Server. I talk about this in my Mastering Server Tuning class in the Resource Semaphore module, for those of you who have a live class season pass or a recorded class season pass. That's in the Mastering Server Tuning class, the Resource Semaphore module. The place where you start is SP-Blitzcache with the parameter sort order equals unused grant. SP-Blitzcache at sort order equals unused grant. This will find queries that are getting a really large memory grant and they're not using it. You want to tune those queries to require lower memory grants, and that's what I go into in that Mastering Server Tuning class module. Next up, we have FutureDBA says, hi Brent, love your videos, thank you. Thank you for sharing so much with the community. Makes it sound like I'm going to open up the trench coat and share something. He says, question, should I do a select into or an insert into select from? I ran the stats, one uses less time, but the second one uses less CPU reads and scan count. Which one is better? So for me, it depends on what are you trying to tune for. If you're trying to tune for something that does less logical reads, choose the one that does less logical reads. If you're trying to tune your SQL Server for lower CPU usage, choose the one that does less CPU usage. If you're trying to tune for query time, choose the one that has the lowest duration, and so forth. And you're going to be like, well, I want one query that's perfect in every way. And to which I'm going to say, unfortunately, that's not how the world works. Your next question is going to be, so how should I know what to tune for? That's where you want to find what your server's top weight type is. Generally, you always want to be trying to reduce whatever that top weight type is so that your server can handle more concurrency with less investment in hardware. To do that, the place to start is SP-Blitz first. since startup equals 1. That'll give you a list of your prioritized wait types since your SQL Server last restarted. And the mastering server tuning class is really all about interpreting those metrics, understanding what high or low is for wait time, and then for each of the 6 most popular or 8 most popular wait types, we talk through how you go about reducing those. So there you go. Next up, Rob says, "Hi Brent, my daughter recently took a trip to Iceland." Oh, very cool. "And told me that the locals are big into tomatoes, specifically tomato ice cream. I wondered if you've run into this or if you've tried it." Well, what it is Iceland has a bunch of volcanoes. And even, you would never know it from me having to put on gloves because the wind is so frickin' cold this morning. It is, just for reference, 46 degrees Fahrenheit, which I'm not too good at metric conversion, but I want to say that's like 17 euros or something like that. Maybe 62 Swiss francs, who knows. But there are a whole bunch of volcanoes. Iceland's basically built on top of a place where 2 tectonic plates are splitting. So there's all kinds of opportunities for the magma, lava, whatever, to come up from underneath. And the ground tends to be really warm in some parts of the country, warm enough that they basically have free hot water. So what they do is they use that hot water that's coming up from the ground to turn steam turbines and get free electricity. Something like 97% of Iceland's energy comes from eco-friendly sources, like either hydroelectric dams from all the water coming off the glaciers, or the steam coming out of the earth. So free electricity means free greenhouse lights. You would never think that this would be a great place to grow tomatoes, but it turns out that if you build greenhouses and you use all this nearly free electricity, it's really easy to put grow lights in. And right now you're like, I want to move here and do marijuana. I don't actually know if marijuana is legal here. In my whole time that I've been here, I've never smelled it, so I guess that's probably a no. The other thing with that is because of the water, the free geothermal hot water that's coming out of there, they can heat the greenhouses, they can give them free fresh water all the time. So there's a famous tomato greenhouse here called Friedheimar. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I bet that's where your daughter went. I've been there many times. It's wonderful. It is a tomato greenhouse where you can go in and take tours, and they have all kinds of really cool tomato foods. Tomato ice cream, Bloody Marys made with all kinds of fresh vegetables. And the ravioli is really good. They do a really good ravioli. Next up, Steve says, "Hey Brent, been a long time." I don't know what that means. So many places the mind can go. Says, I'm having a time, I'm guessing this means I'm having a hard time, trying to get developers to test well. Do you have any advice? And that's Steve. No, I don't. Let's rephrase this as, I'm trying to get someone who I don't have authority over to do something that I want them to do. And if you really want to learn how to do that, go pick up the book. What the hell's the name of that book? Oh man, Gerald Weinberg's The Secrets of Consulting. Gerald Weinberg's book, The Secrets of Consulting, is about the art of giving people advice in a way that they'll hopefully take it, and recognizing when they're not going to take it. Because at the end of the day, you're essentially a consultant to your developers. And if there's something that you want them to do, it's up to you to figure out why they should do it and what the benefits will be for them. There may not be any benefits for them, and that may be why they're not doing it. I'll tell you what, so I have a developer on my payroll, Richie Rump, who's fantastic, and I really look at him more of a business partner than anything else, because the guy can just knock out all kinds of stuff. Just brilliant. I can't say enough good things about Richie. I love you, man. You're fantastic. But as a small business owner, he's my only developer. Oh, I hear a plane now, and I'm going to pop up and see, just to see if you can see where the plane is. I don't know that you can. It's probably not. Richie's my only developer, which means it's expensive when Richie wants to spend time on things. So you would be forgiven for me if you thought that I would say, well, Richie, we don't have time to test. But it's the exact opposite. I want like very high test coverage on everything that we do, because whenever we change something, I want to be able to move with confidence. I want to be able to say, let's go grab this code that we wrote 3 years, go grab this code that you wrote 3 years ago and go make a change to it. And I want him to be able to confidently change something and let the tests run, so that we can then go know with confidence that, yep, everything that worked before still works today, even though this may not be a project that we touch very often. So I can't say enough good things about the ability to move with confidence once you have testing. But I understand why it's a tough sales pitch for resource-constrained teams, because implementing a lot of tests means your products take longer to build, full stop. We don't move as fast as we would if we didn't have testing. And I'm comfortable with that because I'm in it for the long term, but you know, not every shop is. Some shops just want to sling crap out as quickly as possible. Or maybe it's not crap, who knows? Next up, Mr. Griffith asks, will we see you partner with a software vendor? Oh, funny that he asks this, we just got done talking about Richie. See you partner with a software vendor to design a SQL Server monitoring product. Hint, hint. Well, Mr. Griffith, maybe you should go to BrentOzar.com and read the words that are on top of the pages. Hint, hint. Because one of them is monitoring. Hint, hint. If that camera didn't cost $1,000, I would throw this thing at the... Why do people... So just as a side note, when you build things, there's this saying, do good things and tell people. Like, do good work and tell people about it, and you have to do both of them. You can't just do one. If you only tell people that you do good work, but you don't actually do it, then that's not going to succeed. If you only do good work, but you don't tell anybody, then that's going to fail. And here, this is one of those cases where I don't promote SQL Constant Care probably as often as I should. But we have a monitoring product. It's not new. We've had it out for years. And I have news coming about our folks in Europe and the UK as well. Matt asks, hi Brent, how did you find making the leap from TSQL to Postgres? How similar are the two? They're really similar in terms of writing queries. If you write queries for one, you can pretty easily jump over and write queries on the second one. And when we got started, that was really all I had to do was write queries. And I found that pretty easy and straightforward. Not necessarily queries that are fast, mind you. You know, it's easy to write crappy queries on either platform. Management is another matter altogether, like being a database administrator on the two. And that's why we went with Amazon Aurora Postgres. Amazon Aurora, RDS Aurora Postgres Amazon manages the whole thing for you. And that's not a sales pitch for Amazon. Microsoft has similar stuff for Postgres, for Azure SQL DB Postgres now. They call it something else like Azure Database, Managed Database Postgres or something. Microsoft with their naming things. PowerLink Express Enterprise. Now with BI. And then Google has something similar too for a managed Postgres product. But I think that the beauty of the cloud is the ability to buy managed database products. One of the many beauties of the cloud. And then let's see here. We'll take one more. BusyIsGood asks, when troubleshooting performance, you mentioned starting with top weights. I absolutely did earlier as well. It says, when I'm monitoring top weights, should I prioritize total wait time or average millisecond per wait? Well, let me turn around and ask you this. Let's say that you had an employee and you went into your employee's office, and every single time you went in there, they were always waiting on their computer. Like always, you go in all the time, they're just always waiting for their computer. And they don't wait too long. It's only like a second or two, but they're just always waiting on it because you got them this like 10-year-old thing off of eBay. And when you ask them, you go, well, so out of every week that you're here, how many hours are you spending waiting on your computer? And he's like, oh my God, like 30 hours a week I wait on this boat anchor. But then every now and then, they go and make a cup of coffee. They go and stand at the coffee machine. They put their cup in, and it takes, say, 60 seconds in order to make a cup of coffee. their average wait time on making a cup of coffee is high, but they don't wait on it very often. They only drink so many cups of coffee per day. Which one would you focus on? Would you focus on getting them a faster computer, or would you get them a faster coffee machine? The answer there should be fairly obvious. All right, so there's a good batch of questions there. I will stop here and go warm up inside. Holy moly. So our time here in Iceland is winding down. When we first designed this trip, we were going to stay in Iceland as long as we could because I wanted to, both Erica and I really wanted to avoid the people who weren't wearing masks, he says, as he doesn't have a mask on. But look, you talk about separation around here. Wanted to avoid people who weren't wearing masks. We kept getting into elevators in San Diego. Even when the masks were mandatory, there were signs on the outside of the elevator, don't get into the elevator without a mask. We would still get into the elevator, and then people would come in behind us, without having masks on. I have asthma, so I'm always really paranoid about low risk as possible. So now we're having to go back. Originally, we wanted to spend as long as we could here, but Iceland will only let us stay 9 months altogether, which is still wonderful. We had a wonderful 9 months here, and our time is up at the end of September. And end of September, we fly back home to the United States, going back to San Diego, and looking forward to cloudless skies. Oh, that's the one thing that I really miss is just seeing pure, clear, wide open skies all the time and bright sunlight. And perfect timing for moving back too, because it's getting now into closer towards the winter here. Obviously, it's much colder, but it's also darker. The amount of sun that they get per day, sun rises later and later every day, and sun rises later and sun sets earlier every day. Until about December, their days are only 6 hours long. And you go further north in the country and it's even less time than that. So it's perfect timing to go back home and enjoy some of that constant sunlight in Southern California, recharge all my vitamin D batteries. So that is it for today, and I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.